So, have you ever heard of a city declaring war on its own businesses? Sounds kind of wild, right? But that's pretty much what happened in Manila back in the 1960s when a brand new law aimed at motels kicked off this massive legal showdown that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And really, this whole thing boils down to a huge question we're still wrestling with today. Just how far can the government reach into a private business? Not for safety, not for taxes, but to enforce its own idea of morality. Where's that line?
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with the city's moral crusade, then get into the courtroom battle, and of course, the big verdict. After that, we'll really dig into the court's thinking to see how this one case ended up defining so much about the power of the state.
Okay, let's dive in. Our story kicks off in 1963. The city of Manila looks around and decides it's got a major moral problem, and that motels are pretty much public enemy number one. So the city council passes this thing called Ordinance 4760. And listen, this wasn't some minor tweak to the rules. No, this was a massive, sweeping law aimed right at the heart of hotels and motels, especially in popular spots like Ermita and Malate. It was designed to completely change how they did business.
And the city? Oh, they were not shy about why they did it. The official note flat out said motels were fueling an alarming increase in all sorts of immoral activities. They were basically calling these places havens for clandestine meetups. This law was their answer.
And this ordinance had some serious teeth. First, it hit them in the wallet with a massive hike in license fees. Then, operationally, it forced them to gather all this incredibly detailed info on every guest, name, address, who they're with, all out in the open in a public lobby. And maybe the wildest part? It allowed the mayor or police chief to inspect the place whenever they wanted, and banned renting a room out more than twice a day, which, it's a direct shot at their business model.
So you can probably guess what happened next, right? The hotel and motel owners saw this as a direct threat to their survival, and they weren't just going to take it. They decided to fight back, and they took the city to court, sparking this huge legal war over due process.
So the battle lines were drawn. On one side, the hotels argued the law was just oppressive, a total invasion of privacy, and a clear violation of their rights. On the other side, the city's argument was simple. Hey, this is a valid use of our police power. We're just protecting public morals. And in round one, the hotel owners actually won. The lower court totally agreed with them, called the ordinance unconstitutional, and slammed the brakes on it with an injunction. For a little while there, it really looked like the businesses had won the fight. But, of course, the story doesn't end there. The city of Manila was not about to take that loss lying down. They appealed, and the case went all the way up to the highest court in the Philippines for the final, ultimate decision. And the Supreme Court's decision? A complete bombshell. In a total reversal, the court declared that Ordinance 4760 was, in fact, constitutional. The lower court's ruling was thrown out. Okay, so right now you're probably thinking, wait, what? How? How could the highest court come to the exact opposite conclusion? Well, the answer comes down to three really powerful legal ideas that completely tipped the scales. First up is this huge legal concept called police power. Now, this isn't just about police officers. Think of it as the government's inherent authority to act like a guardian for its people. It's the power to make rules to protect public health, safety, and, you guessed it, public morals. And the court did not hold back when describing this power. The justice who wrote the decision called it the most essential, insistent, and the least limitable of powers. That quote alone tells you just how seriously the court takes the government's duty to protect the public good. Next up is a key legal hurdle, the presumption of validity. What this means is that by default, courts assume a law is constitutional. To prove it's not, you can't just argue it's unfair. You have to bring cold, hard facts, a factual foundation. The hotel owners needed to show data, maybe, that the law was bankrupting them or had zero effect on crime. But they didn't. They just argued it was oppressive, and that simply wasn't enough. And finally, we get to due process. The hotels claimed the ordinance violated this right. But the court defined due process very clearly. They boiled it down to one key idea: freedom from arbitrariness. Basically, the government can pass laws that affect you, but they can't do it for random, baseless, or malicious reasons. There has to be a logical point to it. And that right there was the final nail in the coffin. The Supreme Court said this ordinance was not arbitrary. Why? Because all of its strict rules, the fees, the registration, the rental limits, they were all logically connected to the law's stated goal: to stop that alarming increase in immoral behavior. It was seen as a reasonable response to a real problem.
So let's zoom out for a second. What does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? This case wasn't just about some motels in Manila. It really cemented some huge legal principles about the power of the government.
So what are the big takeaways here? Well, first, any law on the books is assumed to be valid. Second, if you want to challenge that law, the burden is on you, and you better come with facts and data, not just feelings. And third, never, ever underestimate the state's police power, especially when it comes to regulating public morality. And with all that powerful reasoning laid out, the Supreme Court issued its final official orders, bringing this long, intense legal fight to a close once and for all.
The judgment was clean and simple. 1. The lower court's decision was reversed. 2. That injunction that was stopping the ordinance, it was lifted. And 3. The final ruling was in favor of the city mayor of Manila. The city had won.
You know, this case from way back in 1967 really set a powerful precedent for state power. But it leaves us with a huge question for today. When our governments want to regulate what we see online for public morals or collect our data for public welfare, where do we draw the line? How much of our personal privacy are we willing to give up for the government's version of a safe and moral society?